Stop acting so high and mighty, Sarah. This whole family knows the military kicked you out for being mentally unstable years ago. The voice of Sophia, my own flesh and blood, the little sister I starved myself for so she could pay her college tuition, stabbed right into my face. She pointed the rim of her expensive champagne flute at me while 50 high society guests watched. Marcus, her fiancé, crumpled a crisp $100 bill and threw it directly onto my dinner plate. He smirked. Take it. Buy yourself a decent suit. The military's only for exceptional men like my father, Admiral Ward. It is not a dumping ground for delusional trash. Laughter erupted around the table. My parents sat there. They looked down, picking at their food, completely ignoring their eldest daughter being publicly humiliated. I did not cry. A piece of shrapnel tearing through my thigh in Kandahar back in 2018 could not squeeze a single tear out of me. These people definitely did not deserve one. But before I show you the exact moment, a 4-star general kicks the doors in and freezes this entire room in absolute terror. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also leave a comment and let me know what city you are listening from and what time it is right now. The crumpled $100 bill sat dead center in my roast beef. Dark brown gravy slowly seeped into the green paper. The loud, grating laughter of Marcus and his corporate friends kept echoing off the high ceilings of the rented ballroom. The air felt thick, choked with the smell of Sophia's heavy, overpowering floral perfume, mixing with the scent of charred meat and spilled alcohol. I did not flinch. I reached out and picked up my heavy silver fork. I did not grab the cash. I did not throw it back in his smug face like some emotional amateur. Instead, I kept my breathing slow and my back completely rigid against the velvet chair. I pressed the cold metal prongs of the fork against the wet paper and deliberately slid the bill toward the porcelain edge of the plate. The sharp, ugly scraping sound cut through the chatter around me. My eyes locked onto the string of numbers printed on the face of the bill. It was a brand new note. No worn edges, no old creases. It was the exact type of fresh currency funneled straight out of the illegal offshore casino pipelines. The same money laundering network my naval intelligence unit had been tracking for the past 8 months. Marcus was not just an arrogant trust fund kid playing businessman. He was a target. And the idiot had just handed a federal investigator physical evidence on a silver platter. I shifted my gaze across the table to my father, the man who taught me how to tie my boots. The man who used to carry me on his shoulders now actively refused to look in my direction. He was a coward hiding behind a wine glass. He lifted his crystal glass of red wine, leaning over the table to clink it against Marcus's glass. He actually muttered a quiet apology to the guy, apologizing on behalf of his socially awkward, broken daughter. Beside him, my mother adjusted the lapel of her tailored blazer. She leaned away from me, treating me like a stray dog that had wandered into a 5-star restaurant. She dug her sharp elbow into my ribs, hissing through her teeth. Slide your chair down. You are going to get grease on Sophia's silk dress. They did not even try to hide their absolute disgust. They made their choice out in the open under the expensive chandeliers. They sided with the guy holding the fat wallet. It did not matter to them that my hazard pay earned by crawling through dirt and dodging mortar fire in the Middle East saved this family from bankruptcy 5 years ago. Every single cent I earned while sleeping in a bunker with dirt falling on my face went straight into their bank accounts to buy the luxury cars currently parked in their driveway. Now they treated a $100 bill thrown at my face like an act of high charity. Tonight I was nothing but a stain on their perfect social gathering, a mistake they wanted to sweep under the rug. Aunt Martha sat directly across from me, loudly smacking her lips as she chewed her steak. She leaned forward, wearing a mask of fake, sickening pity. Her heavy makeup could not hide the ugly judgment in her eyes. You know, Sarah, the military really ruined your head. Martha preached, her diamond bracelets clinking against the wood table. If you just swallow your stubborn pride and apologize to Marcus right now, I can talk to my husband. He can probably get you a minimum wage job sitting in the guard shack at his shipping yard. It is honest work for someone in your condition. Much better than whatever nonsense you are doing now. Pure, unfiltered garbage spilling from the mouths of people who had never sacrificed a single drop of blood for their country. They dressed themselves up in $1,000 designer outfits, but underneath that expensive fabric, they were completely hollow. They measured human worth strictly by bank account balances and country club memberships. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested flat on my lap under the table. I could feel the rough, thick, calloused skin of my own palms. Skin that had been cut by razor wire and burned by desert sand. Scars that I earned keeping ignorant people like them safe. I did not need to defend myself to a table full of parasites. I gave them nothing. No anger, no tears, just a dead tactical stare. My total silence only made Sophia more arrogant. She loved an audience, and she hated when she could not get a reaction. She rolled her eyes dramatically, looking me up and down with pure venom. "Just look at her," Sophia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. Still wearing those cheap, ugly suits. Still holding on to that paranoid mental illness. Paranoid mental illness. Those 3 words hit my brain like a physical blow. They acted like a steel hook, grabbing me by the collar and pulling me violently backward, ripping me out of this noisy dining room, dragging me straight back to a rainy, miserable night at the naval base in San Diego exactly 6 years ago. Back to the exact moment those same perfectly manicured hands, the ones currently holding that expensive champagne glass, pried open my secured government desk drawer. The night she set a match to my career and my family just stood around the ashes watching me burn. 6 years ago, Naval Base, San Diego. I pushed open the heavy reinforced door to my base housing unit. My body ran on nothing but bitter black coffee and fading adrenaline. 48 hours straight in a windowless briefing room, tracking cartel movements. My heavy boots dragged against the cheap linoleum floor. The damp salt air from the Pacific Ocean clung to my uniform. I just wanted to drop my tactical vest, unlace my boots, and pass out on the mattress. But my naval intelligence training kicked in before my exhausted brain could fully process the scene. A sharp metallic crunch echoed under the sole of my boot. I looked down. Jagged shards of silver metal and broken screws scattered across the gray carpet. I snapped my head up. The heavy steel lock on my secured government desk drawer was completely shattered. Someone had taken a heavy hammer and a flathead screwdriver to it. Then I saw her. Sophia was sitting cross-legged on my living room sofa. She was casually flipping through a thick manila folder. My blood turned to actual ice in my veins. Glaring from the top right corner of that folder was a bright, bold red stamp. Top Secret. SCI. Sensitive compartmented information. The floor literally tilted beneath my feet. An unauthorized civilian handling a national security document meant the Federal Bureau of Investigation would be kicking my door off its hinges in less than 10 minutes. It meant a highly classified leak. It meant my undercover operatives embedded near the southern border could end up dead in a ditch before sunrise. Blood ties vanished. The sister I knew ceased to exist. Muscle memory took over. My right hand dropped to my hip. My fingers gripped the cold-textured handle of my government-issued Glock 19. I drew the weapon from the holster in a fraction of a second. I did not point the barrel at her chest. I locked my arms and angled the muzzle exactly 45 degrees down toward the floor. Standard military low-ready position. Drop the file, right now. My voice did not sound like an older sister. It sounded like a tactical commander facing a hostile threat. Any normal human being would freeze in absolute terror. Not Sophia. She rolled her eyes, let out a loud, obnoxious sigh, and tossed the classified folder onto the glass coffee table like it was a cheap fashion magazine. "Oh, please, Sarah, put that stupid piece of metal away," she snapped. She pointed an acrylic fingernail right at my face. "Do not act like you are some important spy. I know you are just hiding cash in there. Those fake red stamps are pathetic. You are just trying to make your miserable, lonely life look exciting." She actually believed it was a prop. She thought a federal intelligence briefing was a child's game. Pure, unadulterated stupidity wrapped in arrogance. I did not argue with a fool. I holstered my weapon. I snatched the folder, secured it inside my heavy iron safe, and then grabbed her expensive leather suitcase. I opened the front door and threw her luggage out into the damp concrete hallway. I ordered her to get off the military installation immediately before I called the armed military police to drag her out. I thought that was the end of the nightmare. I was completely wrong. That same night, Sophia made a phone call. She sat in her comfortable hotel room and put on the greatest acting performance of her entire life. She sobbed to my parents over the phone. She spun a wild, twisted, psychotic story. She told them I had a complete psychological breakdown. She claimed I was printing fake government papers, talking to imaginary enemies, and that I pulled a loaded gun and threatened to shoot my own little sister in the head. Less than an hour later, my cell phone rang. It was my father. I picked up the line, ready to explain the massive federal crime his youngest daughter just committed. He did not give me a single second to speak. "You are a monster!" His voice roared through the speaker, dripping with absolute disgust. "You are sick in the head, Sarah. You need to be locked in a padded psychiatric room. Do not ever show your face at my house again." The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a flat line. The sharp clink of a crystal glass snapping against a porcelain plate pulled me violently out of the memory. The loud, crowded ballroom rushed back into my vision. The smell of Sophia's cheap floral perfume hit my nose again. I was back at the dinner table. 6 long years. That night in San Diego, I had a choice. I had a hidden security camera mounted in the corner of my living room ceiling. I had full, undeniable video evidence of Sophia breaking a federal lock and handling classified intelligence. If I handed that hard drive to my commanding officer, Sophia would be sitting in a federal penitentiary right now, serving a mandatory 10-year sentence for espionage and tampering. I chose to protect her. I chose to stay silent to save her entire life. And how did my family repay me? They took my silence and weaponized it. They used my mercy to build a massive, ugly lie. They convicted me in the court of family gossip, branding me a dangerous, paranoid lunatic for 6 years, just to cover up her total ignorance and her federal crime. I looked across the table at Sophia. She was laughing, her manicured hand resting on Marcus's suit arm. She looked at me with a smirk, acting like she had won the ultimate victory. She thought she had buried me. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt cold. A freezing, highly calculated kind of cold. I reached under the heavy tablecloth. I ran my rough, calloused thumb over the sharp, pressed crease of my black tactical trousers. I smoothed the dark fabric down. The grace period was officially over. I paid my dues in silence to protect the bloodline. Now that bloodline meant absolutely nothing to me. It was time to collect the debt. And I was going to collect it in front of every single person in this room. The cheap mechanical vibration of my cell phone buzzed hard against my ribs. I reached into the inside pocket of my plain black suit jacket and pulled the device out. The harsh, digital light of the screen cut through the dim, romantic lighting of the rented ballroom. It was a text message. It was from my mother. "Eat your meat, keep your mouth shut, and leave early. Make up an excuse. Do not stay here and embarrass Sophia in front of Marcus's friends." I did not text back. I slowly lifted my eyes from the glowing screen. My mother was sitting exactly 2 seats away from me. She was leaning over the table, laughing softly and complimenting the mayor's wife on her diamond necklace. She took a delicate sip of her expensive Pinot Noir. She did not even turn her head in my direction. She sent a digital eviction notice from 30 inches away, just so she would not have to make uncomfortable eye contact with her own flesh and blood. I pressed the side button on the phone. The screen went completely black. I dropped it back into my jacket pocket. They looked at me and saw a broken, unemployed veteran taking up space at their high society table. They saw a failure who could not hold down a normal corporate job. They had absolutely no idea who was actually sitting in the dark corner of this room. I kept my hands folded out of sight under the heavy white linen tablecloth. I ran my right thumb over the knuckles of my left hand. The skin there was rough, thick, and permanently stained with the memory of desert dirt. A jagged, raised scar cut aggressively across the back of my hand. It was a permanent souvenir from a rusted razor wire fence outside a forward operating base in Syria. While my family spent the last 6 years attending country club dinners and buying luxury cars with the hazard pay, I wired home I was crawling through the absolute worst places on the planet. I traded my own blood, my skin, and my sanity to hunt down international terror cells. I tracked millions of dollars moving through the global black market. I dismantled underground financial networks that most people in this room did not even know existed. I did not ask for a parade. I did not want a shiny plastic trophy or a fake pat on the back. The military pinned a silver star on my chest and promoted me to the rank of Admiral of Naval Intelligence in absolute silence. I became a ghost leading other ghosts. I did not need validation from a room full of soft, ignorant civilians who got out of breath just walking up a flight of stairs. I shifted my eyes back to the center of the table. Marcus suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up. He unbuttoned his custom Italian suit jacket and raised his crystal glass. He waved his free hand around, bragging loudly to the entire room about his shipping company. He talked about expanding his fleet of cargo ships. He boasted about massive anonymous foreign investments flooding into his business accounts. He used corporate buzzwords like synergy and global logistics to sound intelligent. My family leaned forward, hanging on every single word that dropped from his mouth. My father nodded like an obedient lapdog, desperately trying to attach himself to Marcus's fake wealth. They clapped, they cheered. They took large sips of their dry red wine, worshipping the ground this arrogant criminal walked on. They were pathetic, willing puppets. They were completely blinded by his heavy gold Rolex and his leased sports cars. They had absolutely no idea that Marcus's so-called global shipping empire was nothing but a dirty laundry machine. His anonymous investors were high-level operators for a brutal weapons and narcotics cartel based out of South America. He was washing cartel blood money through commercial cargo ships, and he was stupid enough to do it using stateside federal banks. Every dollar paying for this extravagant dinner was soaked in human trafficking and illegal arms deals. I let him talk. I let him soak up the applause. My silence was never a sign of submission. It was strict, tactical discipline. A sniper does not shoot the second they see the target. You never draw your weapon until you have completely locked down every single exit and secured the perimeter. I leaned back into my velvet chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I deliberately positioned my shoulders so I had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to all three heavy wooden doors of the ballroom. Exit A was the main lobby doors. Exit B was the swinging kitchen doors. Exit C was the metal fire escape in the back hallway. I tracked the movement of the crowd, calculating the exact distance between Marcus and the nearest exit. I watched the catering staff move around the edges of the room, carrying trays of empty glasses. My eyes locked onto a male waiter pushing a brass wine cart toward our side of the hall. He wore a cheap black vest and a stiff white shirt, just like the rest of the event staff. But it was not his clothes that caught my attention. It was his feet. He did not shuffle. He did not drag his leather shoes against the marble floor like a tired worker at the end of a long shift. He walked with a calculated rolling stride. Heel down first, rolling silently to the toe. It was a stealth walk. It was the exact movement taught in federal field operative training to eliminate all footstep noise during an infiltration. He pushed the cart right up to the edge of Marcus's chair. He did not look at Marcus. As he reached down to grab a fresh bottle of wine, the waiter turned his head just a fraction of an inch. For one single second, his cold-trained eyes looked straight past the entire crowd, cutting through the smoke and the noise, and locked directly onto mine. The waiter with the rolling stride reached the head of the table. He carried a fresh bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. He stepped up beside Marcus, keeping his head respectfully bowed. He reached out to pour the dark red liquid into Marcus's empty crystal glass. Marcus was in the middle of a loud bragging story. He threw his hands out wide to make a point. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist slammed hard into the waiter's forearm. The glass bottle jerked. Dark red wine splashed over the rim, staining the crisp white tablecloth like fresh blood. Marcus stopped talking. The entire table went completely silent. Marcus looked at the red stain, then slowly looked up at the waiter. His face twisted into an ugly, entitled sneer. "Are you completely blind?" Marcus barked. His voice was loud enough to make the tables around us stop and stare. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? It is worth more than you make in an entire year, you clumsy idiot." My father shook his head in disgust, siding with the rich kid. Sophia let out a dramatic gasp, grabbing a cloth napkin to dab at Marcus's sleeve, even though not a single drop had touched him. They loved it. They fed on the power of degrading someone they viewed as beneath them. The waiter did not argue. He kept his posture hunched, playing the perfect role of a terrified minimum wage worker. "I am so sorry, sir. It was my fault. I will clean it up immediately." Marcus scoffed, waving him away like a stray dog. Get out of my face before I have the manager throw you out on the street. Trash! The waiter bowed his head again and stepped back. But as he turned to grab a towel, his profile caught the dim light of the chandelier. A sharp jawline, a small pale scar just below the right earlobe, and the faint, almost invisible clear plastic wire of a comms earpiece running down the back of his neck, completely hidden under the stiff collar of that cheap uniform vest. Captain Jenkins, one of the most lethal field operatives in my Naval Intelligence Task Force, a man who had survived 3 brutal combat tours in Afghanistan, a man who could snap Marcus's neck with 2 fingers. Right now, he was taking verbal abuse from a white-collar criminal, all without blinking an eye. He did it for the mission. He did it for me. The bitter irony burned in the back of my throat. I sat at a table surrounded by my own blood relatives, people who shared my DNA. They treated me like a disease. They starved me of basic human respect. Yet a federal agent who owed me nothing but his professional duty was willing to dress up in a cheap outfit, infiltrate a room full of hostile targets, and take public humiliation just to ensure I had lethal backup. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty does. Jenkins moved silently down the edge of the long table. He gathered empty bread plates and collected dirty silverware. He worked his way toward my isolated corner. My family completely ignored him, just like they ignored me. We were both invisible to them. He stopped right beside my right shoulder. He leaned down slightly, reaching across the table to clear a water glass. It happened in less than a second. His left hand moved with the fluid, impossible speed of a trained operative. A sleight of hand so clean that even the ceiling security cameras would capture nothing but a waiter doing his job. He placed a fresh, thick cardboard drink coaster flat on the dark wood directly in front of me. Underneath the coaster was a square, tightly folded, white paper napkin. Jenkins pulled his hand back. He did not say a single word. He did not even turn his head. But for a fraction of a second, his dark eyes cut sideways. They met mine. The look was absolute cold steel. Pure operational readiness. Total submission to his commanding officer. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen. I kept my breathing perfectly level. I did not rush. I rested my forearms on the edge of the table. I casually dragged the cardboard coaster closer to the edge, pulling it into the heavy shadow of my own body. Using just my thumb, I slid the folded napkin out from under the coaster. I dropped my hand below the table line. I pressed the side button on my phone. The harsh, artificial light from the lock screen illuminated the paper resting in my palm. Thick, black ink written in rushed block letters. Customs transfer complete. Code X7. Cartel hooked. Perimeter secure. My chest tightened. The adrenaline hit my bloodstream like a physical punch. Code X7. It meant the offshore accounts had just pinged the federal tracking system. It meant Marcus's illegal syndicate had officially taken the bait. While he was sitting here drinking expensive wine and bragging about his massive wealth, his shell companies had just authorized a wire transfer directly into a digital trap set by the Department of Defense. The federal crime was no longer a theory. It was concrete. It was undeniable. I crushed the napkin inside my fist. I squeezed the paper until my knuckles turned completely white. I slowly moved my hand and shoved the crumpled evidence deep into the inside pocket of my black suit vest. I looked back up at the table. Sophia was leaning heavily against Marcus. She had a smug, nasty smile plastered across her face. She looked straight at me, tilting her chin up. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to look at her shiny engagement ring, her wealthy fiancé, and her supportive parents, and realize that she had won the war. She wanted to see the defeat in my eyes. I stared back at her. I gave her absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow, dead gaze that looked straight through her skull. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet had just completely vanished. The intelligence operation was over. The waiting was done. From this exact second forward, I was no longer the quiet, damaged older sister taking abuse at the family dinner table. I was the admiral of naval intelligence. I uncrossed my legs and planted both of my heavy boots firmly on the floor. The trap was set. It was time to spring it. The sharp, piercing ring of a silver spoon striking a crystal champagne flute cut through the heavy noise of the ballroom. Marcus stood at the head of the table. He tapped the glass 3 more times. He waited until the entire room went completely quiet. Hired photographers circled the tables, their heavy boots moving over the marble floor, their camera flashes popping like cheap strobe lights. The harsh white bursts reflected off Marcus's slicked back hair and the heavy gold Rolex wrapped around his wrist. He cleared his throat. He put on a fake, humble smile. The exact kind of smile dirty politicians use right before they lie to a desperate crowd. Family. Marcus started projecting his voice so it echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. Family is the most important investment a man can make. When I look around this beautiful room tonight, I see success. I see wealth. I see powerful people. But true class is about charity. He paused. He let his eyes drift away from the crowd and locked directly onto me, sitting in the dark, isolated corner of the long table. Sometimes a prestigious family has to carry dead weight. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with toxic fake pity. Sometimes you have to deal with unfortunate failures, broken, damaged people who cannot survive in the real world. But Sophia and I have enough grace in our hearts to tolerate those burdens. We believe in providing charity for the less fortunate. He raised his crystal glass in my direction. The room erupted into applause. People turned in their velvet chairs to look at me. Wealthy socialites and corporate executives snickered behind their hands. They looked at my plain black suit. They looked at my empty porcelain plate. They laughed. Sophia was not satisfied with just a speech. A speech was not enough. She wanted a public execution. She grabbed a full glass of red wine from the center of the table. She pushed her chair back and strutted toward me. Her high heels clicked sharply against the hard floor, sounding like a ticking clock. She stopped right next to my chair, looming over my shoulder. She slammed the heavy wine glass down onto the wooden table directly in front of my chest. Dark red liquid sloshed violently over the rim, splashing onto the pristine white linen cloth. "Stand up, Sarah," Sophia ordered. Her voice was loud, arrogant, dripping with pure venom. "You have leeched off this family long enough. Pick up that glass, stand on your feet, and say thank you to my future husband. If you beg nicely, maybe he will throw you some spare change so you can finally go get those mental treatments you desperately need." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my hands resting flat on my lap. I stared straight ahead, looking right through her expensive designer dress as if she were made of cheap glass. My total silence infuriated her. Her face flushed dark red. The vein in her neck bulged. Before Sophia could open her mouth to scream at me again, a shadow moved to my right. My mother stood up from her chair. She leaned heavily over the table, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful scowl. She reached out and grabbed my shoulder. Her long, artificial fingernails dug violently through the thick fabric of my suit jacket. She pinched the skin and muscle right next to my collarbone. She squeezed hard, twisting her wrist. A physical threat? An act of pure dominance. "Do exactly what your sister tells you to do," my mother hissed through her perfectly whitened teeth. Her breath smelled of strong peppermint and sour red wine. "Pick up the glass right now. Do not embarrass me in front of these important people for another second." My chest tightened. It was not fear. It was a deep, sickening realization. A mother is supposed to be a shield. On the battlefield, I had soldiers who would take a bullet to the chest to keep me breathing. Here in this fancy, air-conditioned ballroom, my own mother was joining the firing squad. She was using physical force to make her oldest daughter kneel before a white-collar criminal. She was willing to sell my basic human dignity for a front-row seat to Marcus's dirty bank accounts. She chose a leased sports car over her own flesh and blood. The knife of betrayal went all the way to the bone. And then the handle snapped off. Every single drop of misplaced loyalty I ever held for these people evaporated into thin air. They were no longer my family. They were just hostiles in a room. I raised my left hand. I did not strike her. I just placed my rough, calloused palm over her wrist and shoved her arm away from my shoulder. The movement was fast, rigid, and completely devoid of emotion. My mother gasped, stumbling back half a step. She looked at her wrist in absolute shock, holding it against her chest as if a ghost had just touched her. I ignored her. I ignored Sophia standing there with her mouth hanging open. I ignored the confused whispers rippling through the crowded ballroom. I sat perfectly still. Both of my hands came up and rested flat on the edge of the table. I straightened my spine, locking my shoulders back into a perfect, flawless military posture. The posture of a commanding officer holding absolute, unchecked authority. I looked past Sophia's waist. I looked past my mother's horrified face. I locked my eyes directly onto Marcus, who was still standing at the head of the table, holding his champagne glass up in the air. The noise of the room faded into a dull, meaningless hum. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It dropped an octave, turning into a cold, flat razor blade that sliced straight through the heavy, suffocating air. "Enjoy your dinner, Marcus." I kept my eyes pinned to his. I watched his pupils contract. I saw the muscles in his jaw twitch. "Chew it well," I said, spacing the words out with deadly precision. "Because this is your last free meal." The smug, arrogant smile on his face hit a brick wall. It froze. The crystal champagne glass in his hand tilted just enough to spill a single drop onto his expensive leather shoes. The heavy oak doors on the east wall of the ballroom pushed open. 3 men walked inside. They wore crisp, perfectly pressed dress uniforms. Army Reserve officers. Marcus liked to keep a few guys in uniform on his payroll. They were expensive rented props. He used them to stand around at his corporate events drinking his liquor to make his dirty shipping company look legitimate to his wealthy, ignorant investors. Nothing distracts a federal auditor better than a few shiny medals at a dinner party. Sophia spotted them immediately. Her eyes lit up with malicious intent. She saw another weapon she could use against me. She waved her hand high in the air, her diamond bracelets clinking together, signaling the lead officer to come over to our table. She wanted an audience. She wanted actual soldiers to stand over my chair and laugh at my so-called medical discharge. She wanted to prove to everyone in the room that I was a complete fraud. The lead officer was a young Army captain. He held a fresh glass of bourbon in his hand, flashing a bright, arrogant smile at Sophia as he navigated through the crowded tables. He stepped up to our section, stepping right into the heavy scent of spilled wine and expensive perfume. He was barely 3 feet away from my chair. He opened his mouth to greet Sophia. Then his eyes drifted sideways. He saw me sitting in the shadows. His brain needed 1 full second to process the face. Then the realization hit him like a speeding freight train. The arrogant smile vanished from his lips. The blood drained out of his face so fast his skin turned the color of dirty chalk. His body reacted before his conscious mind could even catch up. Deeply ingrained military conditioning overrode everything else in the room. He slammed his heavy leather boots together. The sharp, violent crack of his heels, striking the solid marble floor, echoed sharply over the background music. He pinned his arms flat against his thighs. His spine snapped perfectly straight. His chest expanded, pulling in a massive breath of air. He was preparing to shout the mandatory operational greeting to a superior officer. He recognized the face of the Naval Intelligence Admiral. He knew exactly who was sitting in that chair. I did not let the words escape his throat. I did not raise a finger. I did not shift my weight in the velvet chair. I held his terrified gaze. I gave him 1 slow, deliberate blink, then a microscopic shake of my head. The movement was less than a millimeter. A civilian would never notice it. But to a trained military officer, it was a screaming siren. "Stand down. Keep your mouth shut." The captain slammed his teeth into his bottom lip. He swallowed the command greeting whole. His entire body locked up stiff as a wooden board. A thick bead of cold sweat broke out along his hairline, dripping slowly down the side of his pale face. He stood there absolutely paralyzed, terrified to even exhale in my presence. He did not look at Sophia. He did not look at Marcus. He stared straight ahead into empty space, waiting for a command that would never come. Sophia completely missed reality. She looked at the frozen captain, then looked at me and burst into a loud screeching laugh. "Look at this," she mocked, pointing her acrylic nail right at my chest. "Even a real military officer refuses to look at you, Sarah. You are a complete embarrassment to that uniform. He knows you are crazy. He will not even speak to you." She was deeply, painfully blind to the world around her. She lived in a bubble of her own delusions. But Marcus was not blind. Marcus was a seasoned, high-level criminal. Criminals survive by reading the room. They survive by noticing the small shifts in the air. He looked at the young captain. He saw the rigid posture. He saw the sweat soaking into the collar of the uniform. He saw raw, unfiltered terror in the man's eyes. And he saw exactly who that terror was directed at. Marcus slowly turned his head back to me. The color washed completely out of his face. His stomach dropped. The cold reality of my previous warning finally registered in his brain. The federal wire transfer. The fake shipping contracts. The quiet, damaged sister sitting in the corner, measuring the distance to the exits. He took 2 steps backward, bumping his hip hard into an empty chair. His hands started to shake. The ice cubes in his glass rattled loudly against the crystal. The predator had just realized he was actually the prey. I need to use the restroom," Marcus stammered. His voice was thin, weak, and stripped of all its previous arrogance. He did not wait for Sophia to answer. He dropped his glass onto the table. He turned his back to the crowd, lowered his head, and started speed walking toward the dark hallway leading to the side exit. He was running. Have you ever had to bite your tongue and suffer in total silence while your own blood relatives teamed up with an outsider to crush your self-worth? If you have ever survived that kind of bleeding wound, hit the like button on this video. Leave a comment with the word "enough" so we know you are standing with us, and let us watch this criminal pay the ultimate price right now. I watched Marcus retreat into the shadows of the corridor. The side exit was a heavy metal door leading out to the parking garage. He thought he was smart. He thought he could slip out the back, jump into his leased sports car, and disappear into the night before the local police could arrive. He thought he could buy his way out of this trap. He was incredibly wrong. I did not chase him. I did not yell for security. I simply reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen once. The game of hide and seek was officially over. Marcus power walked down the narrow, dimly lit service corridor. The thick, cheap commercial carpet absorbed the heavy sound of his custom Italian leather shoes. He ripped his high-end cell phone out of his tailored suit pocket. His thumb aggressively tapped the glass screen, trying to dial the private security team he paid to guard the front entrance of the restaurant. Nothing happened. He stared at the top left corner of the screen. No service. He cursed under his breath, using a foul, dirty word that completely shattered his fake high society image. He held the expensive device high up toward the ceiling, desperately searching for a single bar of cellular signal. The screen remained dead. An active Naval Criminal Investigative Service signal jammer was currently parked in a black surveillance van directly outside the restaurant kitchen, blanketing a 3-block radius in an absolute digital blackout. Marcus did not know that. He just thought the old brick building had terrible reception. He shoved the useless phone back into his pocket and broke into a heavy, uncoordinated jog. He reached the end of the long hallway. A heavy steel fire exit door stood between him and the private parking garage where his leased sports car was waiting. He threw both of his hands against the cold metal push bar. The bar did not budge. He hit it again. Harder. He threw his entire shoulder into the painted steel. A dull, heavy thud echoed off the narrow brick walls. The electronic deadbolt had been remotely deactivated and locked down from the outside command post. Marcus rattled the heavy metal handle. He kicked the bottom of the door with his expensive shoe scuffing the shiny leather. He was acting exactly like a cornered street rat realizing the steel trap had just snapped shut over its tail. "Where exactly do you think you are going, Marcus?" The voice floated down the dark corridor. It was low. It was perfectly calm. It was completely devoid of the panic he expected to hear from me. Marcus jumped. He spun around so fast he nearly lost his footing on the carpet. I stepped out from the deep shadows near the kitchen entrance. The dim yellow emergency lights flickered overhead, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I walked toward him. I did not run. I did not rush. I let the hard rubber heels of my tactical Oxford strike the wooden floorboards with a slow, methodical, heavy rhythm. Step. Pause. Step. It was the sound of a predator systematically cornering its prey. The silent, abused older sister from the dinner table was completely gone. I let my shoulders drop. I let my spine lock into strict military posture. I let the heavy, suffocating weight of my actual rank fill the narrow space between us. Marcus backed up. He retreated until his shoulder blades hit the locked steel door. His chest heaved up and down. A thick layer of greasy sweat coated his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He wiped his mouth with the back of his trembling hand. He was terrified. His survival instincts told him to drop to his knees, but his massive fragile ego refused to let him surrender to a woman his new family had spent the entire night humiliating. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "What the hell are you doing back here?" Marcus snarled. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the panic bubbling up in his throat. "You think locking a door is going to stop me? You are completely insane, Sarah. I will ruin you. One phone call. All it takes is one single phone call to my father, and he will crush your pathetic little life into dust. He will have you locked in a psychiatric ward before sunrise." I stopped walking. I stood exactly 2 feet away from him. I was close enough to smell the sour stench of pure animal fear sweating out through his expensive designer cologne. I did not yell. I did not look angry. I did not offer a long emotional speech about how he had treated me at the table. I gave him a slow, dead smile. I reached inside my black suit jacket. My fingers completely bypassed the cold steel of my holstered weapon and grabbed a thick, tri-folded piece of heavy stock paper. I pulled it out and snapped it open with one hand. The bright red embossed seal of a United States federal magistrate judge gleamed under the flickering yellow hallway light. I stepped forward, invading his personal space. I slammed the federal arrest warrant flat against his chest, pinning the heavy paper right over his rapidly beating heart. Marcus looked down. His bloodshot eyes frantically scanned the bold black text. He saw the specific federal criminal codes. He saw the exact list of his secret offshore bank accounts. "Your father is a 4-star general in the United States Army." I stated, spacing my words out with deadly mechanical precision. "He commands soldiers on a battlefield. He has absolutely zero jurisdiction over federal money laundering, massive wire fraud, and international terror financing." Marcus stopped breathing. His chest froze against the paper in my hand. His eyes bulged wide open. The dark pupils contracted into tiny black pinpricks as they landed on the bottom right corner of the page. He saw the authorized signature. He saw the official title printed in bold black ink directly beneath my name. Sarah Gibson, Admiral, Naval Intelligence Command. His jaw dropped open. He looked from the paper up to my face. The absolute horror setting into his brain was beautiful to watch. His entire fake empire crumbled into dust in a matter of 5 seconds. He opened his mouth. A pathetic, high-pitched gasp was the only sound that managed to escape his throat. He tried to scream. He wanted to call out for his powerful father. He wanted to call out for Sophia to save him. Before he could force a single word into the air, the concrete floor beneath our feet violently shook. A deafening mechanical roar ripped through the night outside the brick walls. Heavy police sirens wailed, cutting through the thick silence. Red and blue emergency lights flashed violently through the small frosted window above the fire door. Then came the explosion. A massive, ear-shattering boom erupted from the main ballroom behind me. The concussive shockwave rattled the drywall in the corridor. Out in the main dining hall, the massive double oak doors were completely blown off their reinforced steel hinges by a tactical breaching charge. The terrified screams of 50 high society guests echoed down the hall as the full crushing weight of the federal government finally crashed the party. I grabbed Marcus by the thick lapels of his expensive Italian suit. I did not struggle. I used the raw, brutal leverage I learned in close quarters combat training. I spun his body around and shoved him violently out of the dark hallway. He stumbled forward, waving his arms to catch his balance, and tripped right back into the center of the main ballroom. He hit the marble floor on his knees. At that exact second, the blown-out oak doors of the main entrance vomited a black flood of heavily armed personnel. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents poured into the room. They moved with absolute terrifying synchronization. Black tactical gear, heavy body armor. The metallic mechanical clacks of M4 rifles coming off safety echoed sharply against the high ceiling. Brilliant, blinding flashes of red and blue police strobes sliced through the giant glass windows, washing the terrified faces of the high society guests in a sick neon light. Chaos erupted. Wealthy corporate executives screamed, dropping their expensive champagne glasses to the floor. Men in custom tuxedos pushed their own wives out of the way, scrambling backward and pressing their bodies flat against the brick walls to escape the firing line of the federal agents. Sophia did not run for cover. She was completely trapped inside her own massive ego. She had spent the last 6 years controlling the narrative, convincing everyone that she was the golden child and I was the mentally unstable threat. Even with heavily armed federal agents swarming the room, her brain refused to accept reality. She spotted me walking slowly out of the hallway, standing behind Marcus. Sophia sprinted toward the center of the room. Her expensive heels clicked wildly against the marble. She pointed her acrylic finger directly at my chest. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly entitlement. "Arrest her!" Sophia shrieked at the nearest NCIS agent, her voice cracking over the noise of the sirens. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Grab her. That crazy bitch is impersonating the military. She is a mental patient, and she just assaulted my fiancé." The tactical agents did not even blink. They ignored her completely. They did not raise a weapon. They did not shout a command. Instead, they stepped back. The black sea of body armor split down the middle. They formed two perfectly straight, silent lines, creating a wide path leading directly from the shattered entrance to the center of the room. Heavy, measured footsteps echoed from the lobby. A man walked through the broken doorway. He wore the immaculate dark blue dress uniform of the United States Army. 4 silver stars gleamed on each of his shoulder boards. A massive rack of combat ribbons covered his left chest. General Thomas Ward, Marcus's father, the highest-ranking military official in the state and the ultimate symbol of power my family worshipped. The room went dead silent. The screaming stopped. My father saw the general. His eyes lit up with desperate relief. He thought the cavalry had arrived to save Marcus. He stepped forward from the crowd, wiping sweat from his forehead, preparing to kiss the general's boots and beg him to get rid of his crazy daughter. "General Ward, thank God," my father stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Please, sir, my daughter Sarah, she is not well. I promise you, we will have her committed to a hospital tonight." General Ward did not even look at my father. He walked straight past him, treating my father like an invisible piece of trash. He did not look at his son Marcus, who was still kneeling on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The 4-star general was staring directly at me. He marched forward with the aggressive stride of a combat commander. But as he closed the distance, stopping exactly 10 feet away from where I stood, something happened. The general froze. The hard, aggressive lines of his weathered face suddenly collapsed. His jaw went completely slack. The air drained out of his lungs in a sharp, audible hiss. He bumped into a nearby waiter, knocking a full tray of crystal glasses onto the marble floor. The shattering sound was violently loud in the dead silent room, but the general did not even flinch. He did not break eye contact with me. He took one slow, highly unnatural step backward. His hands, usually steady as stone, began to tremble against the seams of his uniform trousers. "Admiral Gibson." The words scraped out of the general's throat. His voice was completely stripped of its 4-star authority. It was hollow, ashamed, terrified. Is that you, ma'am?" The entire ballroom plunged into an absolute suffocating vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. My father stopped breathing. His hands dropped to his sides. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, old ghost. Sophia's arm, still pointing aggressively at me, slowly fell. Her mouth hung open. Her eyes darted back and forth between the terrified 4-star general and the sister she had just called a mental patient. Before the shock could fully process in their pathetic brains, a tall man in a dark federal windbreaker stepped through the gap in the tactical line. Captain Reeves, the lead commander of the NCIS strike team. He walked directly past Sophia. He did not push her. He simply walked through her space, forcing her to stumble backward in her high heels to avoid getting trampled. He marched straight up to me. Reeves stopped. He slammed the heavy heels of his tactical boots together. The sound cracked like a gunshot. He locked his spine, snapped his right hand up to the brim of his tactical cap, and executed a flawless, razor-sharp military salute. "Reporting, Admiral Gibson." Reeves barked, his voice echoing off the walls, officially driving the final nail into the coffin. "Perimeter is locked. Targets are contained. Standing by for your direct orders, ma'am." I stood perfectly still. I did not look at the screaming sister. I did not look at the pale, horrified parents. I kept my hands at my sides. I looked down at the trembling 4-star general and the arrogant son kneeling in the dirt at my feet. The illusion was over. I let my eyes sweep across the room, watching the 6-year-old lie burn to the ground. I gave Captain Reeves a single sharp nod. The execution of orders was immediate. 2 heavily armored NCIS agents broke from the line. They grabbed Marcus by his expensive lapels, lifted him entirely off his knees, and slammed his upper body face down onto the closest dining table. Crystal wine glasses shattered under his chest. Expensive red wine soaked right through his custom Italian suit. Marcus thrashed wildly. He kicked his legs out, acting exactly like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. "Dad!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror as an agent pinned his neck flat against the wood. "Dad, do something. Tell them to stop. Tell her to let me go." The harsh metallic ratchet of heavy steel handcuffs tightening around his wrists cut through his pathetic screaming. I looked at General Ward. I waited to see if the powerful 4-star general would use his massive influence to protect his corrupt son. I waited to see if he would pull the same sickening blind loyalty my own parents pulled to protect Sophia. General Ward did not move. He stood perfectly at attention. He clamped his jaw shut so hard the muscles in his neck jumped. He stared straight ahead at the brick wall, refusing to make eye contact with his screaming son. He chose military discipline over dirty blood. He chose the law. The stark contrast made the absolute cowardice of my own parents look even more disgusting. Sophia finally broke. The thick wall of delusion protecting her arrogant brain completely shattered. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the marble floor. Her expensive silk dress bunched up around her knees. The high society princess was completely gone. She dragged herself across the cold floor on her hands and knees, crawling directly toward my tactical boots. Thick black streams of expensive mascara ran down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. She reached out with her shaking hands and grabbed the bottom hem of my suit trousers. "Sarah, please," Sophia sobbed. Her voice was a wet, ugly mess of panic and desperation. She tilted her head up, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, Sarah, I am your sister. I am your little sister. You have the power. You can stop this. Tell them to let him go. Please do not ruin my wedding. I will do anything. I am sorry. I am so sorry." I looked down at her. I searched my chest for a single shred of pity. I searched for the older sister who used to skip lunches just so this girl could buy a new prom dress. I found absolutely nothing. There was no victory in my chest. There was no joy. There was only a cold, hollow space filled with absolute disgust. I did not see a sister. I saw a parasite begging for its host not to die. I did not yell at her. I simply lifted my right foot and took one step backward. Sophia's hand slipped off my trousers. She fell forward, her palms slapping hard against the empty marble floor where my boots had just been. She let out a loud, pathetic wail, curling into a ball on the ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My father stumbled forward out of the crowd. He looked like an old, broken man who had just aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His shoulders were slumped. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached out toward me. "Sarah." My father choked out, his voice trembling. He swallowed hard. "Sarah. Baby. We did not know. We had no idea you were. I am sorry. Your mother and I. We are so sorry. We did not know the truth." I turned my head. I locked eyes with him. The sheer unadulterated contempt in my stare stopped him dead in his tracks. He physically flinched. "You knew," I stated. My voice was completely flat, cold, unforgiving. "Every single one of you knew exactly who I was. But you chose to believe her lies. You chose to call me crazy. Because throwing an unloved daughter to the wolves was so much easier than admitting you raised a thief." My father opened his mouth to argue, to beg for a second chance, but I completely cut him off. I reached into the front breast pocket of my suit. I pulled out a heavy matte black tactical fountain pen. I snapped the cap off with my thumb. Captain Reeves immediately stepped forward and held out a thick stack of federal arrest documents on a clipboard. I did not hesitate. I did not let my hand shake. I pressed the pen to the paper and slashed my signature across the bottom line. The sound of the metal nib scratching against the paper was loud, quick, and merciless. It sounded exactly like the closing of a coffin lid. I tapped the pen and dropped it back into my pocket. I am not your daughter, I said, looking straight through my father's tear-filled eyes. The person standing in front of you is the Admiral of Naval Intelligence Command, and I do not negotiate with enablers. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on my mother, who was currently covering her face and sobbing against a brick wall. I turned my back on the entire room. I gave Captain Reeves a subtle nod. Process the prisoner. Shut the site down. Yes, ma'am, Reeves barked. The heavy line of tactical agents immediately parted down the center, opening a wide, clear path leading straight out of the building. The wealthy, arrogant guests who had laughed at me 20 minutes ago now pressed their backs hard against the walls. They lowered their heads. They stared at the tips of their own shoes, absolutely terrified to make eye contact with me. I walked down the center of the path. My boots struck the marble floor in a slow, even heavy rhythm. I heard Marcus screaming as they dragged him out of the room in handcuffs. I heard Sophia wailing my name, begging me to come back. The sounds bounced off the high ceilings, echoing through the massive space like the desperate cries of drowning rats. I walked through the shattered entrance of the ballroom. I stepped out into the cool, dark night air. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a loud final slam. I did not look back. The morning sun cut through the cheap plastic blinds of my hotel room. My personal cell phone vibrated violently against the hollow wooden nightstand. It had been vibrating for 8 straight hours. I walked over and picked up the device. The glass screen was completely cluttered with notifications. 74 missed calls. 120 text messages. The names flashing across the glass were familiar. My mother. My father. My older cousin. Sophia. Please come home. We need to talk. Family is still family. We always loved you, Sarah. It was a pathetic, disgusting display of fake affection. They did not love me. They loved the power I suddenly represented. They were absolutely terrified of the 4-star general they saw shaking in his boots last night. They wanted to drag me back into their twisted, toxic webs so they could use my military rank to fix the massive federal legal hole Marcus just dug for them. When a soldier finally crawls out of a collapsed, rotting trench, they do not crawl back in just to pick up the garbage left behind in the mud. I did not type a reply. I did not block their phone numbers. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my tactical pen, and used the sharp metal tip to pop the SIM tray out of the side of the phone. I pulled the tiny square of plastic out. I pinched it hard between my thumb and index finger and bent it backward. The plastic snapped with a sharp, crisp crack. I dropped the broken pieces straight into the metal trash can by the desk. An hour later, I sat in the back seat of a black armored government SUV. I tapped the thick ballistic glass. I told my driver to make one quick detour before hitting the military airfield. We pulled up to the curb outside my childhood home. The green lawn was perfectly manicured. The luxury cars were parked in the wide driveway. The house looked like a magazine cover, but the foundation was completely rotten. I did not open the door. I did not step foot on the concrete driveway. I rolled the heavy window down just enough to hand my driver a blank white envelope. "Drop it in the metal box," I ordered. He stepped out, walked to the curb, and dropped the envelope into the mailbox. He got back in and put the heavy truck in drive. There was no long emotional letter inside that envelope. There were no tears stained on the paper, just a single-lined index card with a few sentences written in thick black ink. Respect cannot be demanded. It is earned with blood. You chose the lie because it was comfortable. I chose the truth because it keeps my people alive. Do not ever look for me again. Cold, clinical, final. The heavy SUV accelerated away from the wealthy neighborhood. We merged onto the coastal highway. The city of Charleston faded away in the rearview mirror. I rolled the window all the way down. The cold, violent wind off the Atlantic Ocean rushed into the cabin. It whipped my hair against my face. The heavy smell of salt water and diesel fuel filled my lungs. It was harsh. It was biting. It was the most authentic thing I had felt in 6 long years. I had spent years swimming in a suffocating swamp of fake family loyalty. Now the heavy mud was finally washing off. The vehicle slowed down, approaching the heavily guarded gates of the naval installation. The armed military police checked the government plates, snapped sharp salutes, and waved us through the steel barricades. We drove down the long stretch of gray concrete toward the deep water port. The SUV came to a stop. The heavy doors swung open. Captain Reeves stood on the concrete pier. He wore his dark working uniform. His posture was perfectly straight. He held the door open for me. I looked into his eyes as I stepped out of the vehicle. There was no pity. There was no fake affection. There was only the hard, unbreakable loyalty of a soldier ready to die for his commanding officer. I stepped onto the damp concrete. I looked out past the tall security fences, staring into the deep, dark water of the ocean. Massive, silent, lethal. The dark gray hull of a United States supercarrier cut across the horizon line. It blocked out the morning sun. Thousands of tons of reinforced steel carrying 5,000 sailors who operated entirely on trust, discipline, and honor. That was my real family. A family defined by a uniform, not by a bloodline. A brotherhood built by men and women who would rather take a bullet to the chest than ever stab a comrade in the back. I adjusted the collar of my black jacket. I rolled my shoulders back and took a massive breath of the freezing ocean air. Every single ounce of weight vanished from my shoulders. The toxic ghost of San Diego was dead. The war inside that pathetic, rich dining room was over. The damaged, silent sister they loved to humiliate was gone forever. I turned toward Captain Reeves. "Time to get to work," I said. The era of Admiral Sarah Gibson had just begun. Forgiveness does not mean allowing someone to continue stepping on your neck. Sometimes it means leaving them completely behind so you can finally find your own peace. If you feel stronger after listening to this story, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment with the word freedom if you agree that sometimes cutting ties with toxic relatives is the only way to save your own life.